It's the 82nd Annual Academy Awards, and the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has found itself in a pickle. The previous year, 4 movies were consistent players in the awards circuit: The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Frost Nixon, Milk, and Slumdog Millionaire. Throughout the awards season, these 4 movies were nominated at virtually every predecessor awards show. So while it was no surprise when they received Best Picture nominations, there was a 5th film that was also making a strong showing everywhere. Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight was considered a masterpiece of the superhero genre, and was successful enough to become the highest grossing film of the year and, at the time, the 2nd highest grossing film of all time, finally dethroning Star Wars after many, many years. The late Heath Ledger routinely won the award for Best Supporting Actor, and it was assumed that The Dark Knight would get into the Oscar race in Best Picture. Also being talked about for a Best Picture nomination was WALL-E, Pixar's latest movie about a trash robot who won the hearts of children and adults alike. And many critics and award pundits felt that not only would a Best Picture nomination for this film be a huge win for the animation studio, whose name was more respected than any other in the industry, but if it managed to get in with The Dark Knight, it would help audiences become the most invested in the ceremony since The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King swept the Oscars 5 years previously. Instead, neither film got in, and the 5th slot went to Stephen Daldry's The Reader, a movie about a young boy who has a sexual relationship with a Nazi. And I'm not being hyperbolic, she's a literal Nazi in the movie. Now, let me pause by saying that, unlike most people, I don't hate this movie. In fact, I've seen it a few times, and I can confidently say that it is a complex, gripping story that poses a lot of moral and ethical questions about how war crimes were ultimately judged and the consequences humans face when they let their shame overcome them. It's, in my opinion, a very good movie. That being said, The Dark Knight and WALL-E were great movies, and there was no reason The Reader should have gotten into Best Picture over either of those two. Not only were audiences outraged, but the industry also responded with anger. How could the Oscars pretend to represent the best Hollywood has to offer when they ignore something great and popular? Sure, you don't always want to give a movie a Best Picture nomination just because it made a ton of money, but when the highest grossing film of the year is also one of the best, passing over it for a much less known movie with more mixed reviews is akin to award malpractice. Keep in mind, a couple of the original goals of the Oscars, aside from union busting, check out the above video for more information, were to legitimize movies as an art form and to sell more movie tickets. By nominating The Reader over The Dark Knight and WALL-E, The Reader would likely sell some more tickets, but in every other way, the nomination went against the Academy's stated goals. The same Academy that went out of their comfort zone to award movies with orcs, gangsters, and epic battles, as well as nominated movies about sharks, pigs, and beasts, couldn't nominate the highest grossing film of the year that many also consider to be one of the best because, what, it was about a guy dressed as a bat fighting a clown? Something needed to change. And a major change would come the following year when the Academy announced an expanded Best Picture field. Now, instead of 5 nominees, there would be 10. This actually wasn't as new as many would think. Back in the old days, the Academy would routinely give 10 nominations in most categories, including Best Picture, before a more standardized 5 was settled on in later years. So, in many ways, they were going back to how things used to be. The Academy argued that this would allow for more mainstream movies to get into the Best Picture race, and there was hope that by doing that, it would recapture some of the interest for audiences who would be more likely to tune in if more mainstream films were nominated. While this sounds like a cop-out on the surface, this did free Academy members to vote for films they otherwise wouldn't have previously, and when the nominations were announced, it was largely a huge success. The films nominated for Picture were more diverse, with many of them being box office hits as well as critical darlings. And, as you can probably expect, this would also shake up the award for Best Animated Feature as well, which was entering its 9th year and was finally going to have 5 nominations, the first time it had happened since 2002. The nominees for Best Picture were Avatar, The Blind Side, District 9, An Education, The Hurt Lock, Inglourious Bastard, Precious, based on the novel Push by Safir, A Serious Man, Up in the Air. Now, when you look at that list, It's hard to argue the tactic to expand the Best Picture race didn't work on some level. There was some science fiction, major box office successes, a romantic drama, a biopic, a war film, and the usual dramas that the Academy loves to nominate. And unlike last year, Avatar, the highest grossing film of the year and all time for a period, was nominated for Best Picture. So audiences should very well be interested in watching the ceremony this year. With all those potential eyeballs on the ceremony, it would be a great year for the Best Animated Feature category to be a little competitive. And competitive it just might be. After several years of a low number of animated films being released, enough movies came out to bump the nominations from 3 to 5 for the first time since 2002. What's more, this was the first time in 3 years where the snubs could actually be considered true snubs. Although before we get to those, it's worth noting that for some reason, one of the qualifying films was Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Squeakquel, which was a shocking box office success, and Fox successfully argued, once again, like the previous movie, it was more of an animated film than it was a live-action one. But if the first movie didn't get nominated in a weak year, there was no way the sequel was being nominated in a strong year. Another surprisingly eligible film was Tinker Bell and the Lost Treasure, a movie that most people saw when it launched on DVD, but it did play at the El Capitan Theater in Hollywood for 1 week for Oscar consideration. It also was not nominated. Getting to the true snubs, we start with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. From directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, who would eventually become animation superstars, their first animated movie was a surprise hit with audiences and critics, who found the absurd premise and execution hilarious and moving. I mean, I didn't. Personally, I think the movie sucks. But I have to acknowledge it was loved enough that an Oscar nomination was not out of the question. Ever the bridesmaid, but never the bride. Heck, not even the bridesmaid. Robert Zemeckis and his adaptation of the classic Charles Dickens novella A Christmas Carol also struck out. Produced for Disney and starring Jim Carrey as Ebenezer Scrooge, the Ghost, and other multiple roles, this version of the story was noted for its horror tone and stunning 3D visuals. The exclusion most likely had more to do with that darn motion capture technique that the voting animators had such issues with in the past, but unlike The Polar Express, this movie did not receive nominations in any other category. Previous Oscar winner Adam Elliott made his feature film debut with Marion Max, a stop-motion film made for adults about the unusual relationship between a young Australian girl and an autistic middle-aged American, who find themselves being unlikely pen pals. With a lot of warmth and heart, this was considered a very surprising omission, and it's something I highly recommend hunting down if you haven't seen it yet. DreamWorks was left out again for Monsters vs. Aliens, which had a more mixed reception after Kung Fu Panda, but was praised for its stunning 3D. You may be noticing a theme that 3D was big at the movies this year. Despite having Tim Burton as a producer, the Shane Acker-directed Nine couldn't secure a nomination in Best Animated Feature, even though, ironically, the short that the movie was based on was previously nominated for Best Animated Short Film. The stop-motion film A Town Called Panic couldn't break out of its niche market to get a nomination, and remains a largely undiscovered gem to this day. However, the big snub was the unthinkable one. Ponyo, the latest film from Oscar-winning director Hayao Miyazaki, missed getting a nomination. Miyazaki's personal take on The Little Mermaid, the fact that the Academy found 5 other movies to nominate over the animation master, was considered stunning to the point of being sacrilegious. And this remains the only time in the award's existence that Miyazaki himself wasn't nominated for one of his films. If Miyazaki couldn't make it in, how good were the movies that were nominated? The answer, it turns out, is pretty damn good. The first nominee was Coraline, directed by Henry Selick, director of The Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, and this abomination. The movie was released by sort of, kind of, not really upstart animation studio Laika, who previously operated under the name Will Vinton Studios. Hoping to make a name for themselves, Laika decided their first feature film would be a family horror movie based on the Neil Gaiman novel of the same name. With groundbreaking stop-motion animation and great reviews, it was a strong introduction to the newly rebranded studio, and it left a mark that they were a studio to keep an eye on. The second nominee was Fantastic Mr. Fox. Released by 20th Century Fox Animation, the movie was another stop-motion feature based on a book by Roald Dahl. The voice cast was stacked with Oscar winners like George Clooney and Meryl Streep in the lead roles, along with other acclaimed actors like Bill Murray and Willem Dafoe. The film also received a second nomination for Best Score for Alexander Desplat. Most notable is that this was the animation debut of Wes Anderson, the director of such films as The Royal Tenenbaums and The Life Aquatic, who would direct the film. Or did he? We'll discuss that in a bit. The third nomination was extra significant, as it signaled Disney's return to traditional hand-drawn 2D animation. Directed by Ron Clements and John Musker, The Princess and the Frog was a return to form for the company. After purchasing Pixar and making John Lasseter the CCO of both Pixar and Disney Animation, Lasseter was determined to bring traditional animation back to the company. The Princess and the Frog was the end result of that first effort, and the movie was warmly embraced by audiences, critics, and even the Academy itself, which awarded the movie 3 Oscar nominations overall. With a great box office run that only came to a screeching halt when Avatar was released, it was a strong comeback for a medium Disney deemed dead several years prior. The fourth nomination is what threw many people for a loop, as The Secret of the Kells was a surprise nominee. Directed by Tom Moore and released by the relatively unknown Cartoon Saloon, the movie was an Irish film about the making of the Book of Kells, which, for those unaware, is an illustrated manuscript from the 9th century containing the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. That being said, the movie isn't so much a religious film as it is a fantasy film about family and traditions. With gorgeous 2D animation and a wonderful soundtrack, the inclusion on Oscar morning may have been a surprise to many, but it was less surprising once people saw it, and this would be the beginning of a long relationship between Oscar and Cartoon Saloon. The final nominee was from the current champion Pixar. Up, directed by Pete Docter, told the story of an old widower who decided to fly his house out to the jungle in memory of his late wife. With bright colors and a clever use of 3D effects and an opening 8 minutes that wrecked virtually everyone who watched it, Up was considered another instant classic from the Emeryville studio. The question was, would Pixar continue their winning streak, or would one of these other fantastic movies win? The race, once again, was on. After a fun opening musical number by Neil Patrick Harris, hosts Steve Martin and Alec Baldwin opened the show with a back-and-forth monologue. Steve Martin had hosted the show solo before, but this year the Academy decided to partner him with Alec Baldwin, his co-star from the comedy So Complicated from earlier the previous year. A gimmick that worked for the opening of the show, but otherwise, Steve likely could have handled this on his own, as he seemed far more comfortable hosting than Baldwin did. As with most shows, the ceremony opened with Best Supporting Actor, which went to Christoph Waltz for his mesmerizing, captivating, scene-stealing performance in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds. Seriously, I can't sing enough praise of this performance, and when I get done with the animated features, I may make a video gushing about how great this performance is in the history of film. Best Animated Feature was up next, which was to be presented by Cameron Diaz and Steve Carell.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
Wasn't he just up here making an ass of himself 2 years ago? Well, maybe he'll do better this time around.
When you are as beautiful as Cameron and I, it is somewhere between irony and tragedy to appear in films where people can't see our faces.
And bodies.
Especially bodies.
Tonight's nominees represent a field that has made such incredible strides that watching their dazzling images is almost as exciting as looking at us now. When we're making movies, wait, I'm sorry. They didn't fix the teleprompter, so.
Okay, this was originally written for Cameron and Jude Law. I stepped in at the last minute.
Thanks, Jude. Steve.
Yep.
Alright, I suppose that wasn't too bad. While I could have lived without making the award about themselves, at least Steve has a good sense of humor about himself. And hey, the Academy even commissioned original animation from the nominated films, which is greatly appreciated. Although, if you wonder why this award wasn't being taken seriously, maybe it was because even the animators were pulling crap like this.
Winning an Oscar mean to you?
Well, of course, it's a tremendous honor to be nominated with such a prestigious group. And these are all highly accomplished films. They are the best of the best. Look at this. You're looking at Princess. What's the Secret of Kells? These are all cartoons. I thought we got nominated like a real movie.
The fact that this clip came from a movie that was directed by the guy who was primarily known for live action films makes it even more strange that no one complained at the time. After the nominated films were read out, it was time to reveal the winner.
And the winner is... let's see. Up. Peter Docter.
Yep, Pixar remained the reigning champ, and Pete Docter walked away with his first Academy Award. Now, going into the night, this seemed like a pretty sure thing. Unlike previous years, though, there were multiple reasons as to why, and we're going to go over 10, yes, I said 10 reasons Up was successful at the Oscars this year. Number 1, great reviews. Although this is practically a given at this point, reviews for Up were ecstatic, with many critics calling it one of the best films of the year. As of this recording, Up has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 98% by critics and 90% by audiences. Those were higher scores than many of the movies nominated for Best Picture that night, though there may have been a reason for that, and we'll get to it later. Number 2, exceptional box office. While box office can work for or against you in awards time, the reality is not only can big box office help your movie be seen by Academy members, but the box office for Up was, frankly, stunning. This is a movie about an old guy flying his house across a foreign land using balloons. Yet somehow, a movie that sounds like it would be a modest box office success at best and struggle to find merchandising opportunities somehow managed to gross over $700 million worldwide. Now, some of that might have been because of inflated ticket prices due to the overwhelming success of the 3D showings, but even so, no one looked at this movie and thought it was going to be a movie that would be this big. In many ways, this is still one of Pixar's most unlikely success stories. It was obvious then, it's obvious now, and it feeds into our next point, number 3, Pixar's acclaimed brand. Pixar's brand was going strong. While they may have been underdogs in the first few years of this award, they had turned into a force to be reckoned with in Hollywood. They had tackled toys, bugs, monsters, superheroes, robots, and now even old people. Their name was arguably the biggest in Hollywood, and they were considered more reliable than the Nintendo seal of quality ever was. Check out these videos if you don't get the reference. Pixar's name had become their greatest weapon, and Academy voters felt comfortable nominating them for all the awards they could. Number 4, Pete Docter was overdue. Since Pixar was a brand unto itself at this point, this also meant that one of their star creators, Pete Docter, was very much overdue. Like his co-workers John Lasseter and Andrew Stanton, Docter had been nominated for several Academy Awards at this point. But unlike his colleagues, he had yet to win. His first nomination came as one of the co-writers for Toy Story, which you may remember was the first animated film to receive a Best Original Screenplay nomination. He was also nominated for the very first Academy Award for Best Animated Feature Film, and was actually the only director to get nominated for directing his film that year. As even though the Academy had the rule that the award would go to the producer, he was also a producer on that film, so he was one of the nominees there. He would then be nominated again for Best Animated Short Film for Mike's New Car, a short that took place in the Monsters, Inc. universe. He would also be nominated in the Best Original Screenplay category the previous year for co-writing WALL-E. And now that he was nominated for a couple Oscars this year, it was a perfect opportunity for animators and Academy voters in general to finally give Docter a much-deserved Oscar for his years of contribution to animation, as well as for directing one of the best films of the year. Number 5, the opening 8 minutes. It has to be mentioned that the opening 8 minutes of Up was like a movie event in itself. If this opening scene had been released as a short film, it would have won all the awards in short film circuits. The fact that there was a whole great movie following it felt like a miracle. Seriously, the opening of this movie was so good that for years, people were joking that Pixar made a more compelling love story in 8 minutes than the Twilight series did in 5 movies. It was really that good, and none of the other movies had an opening or ending that came close to how good Up's opening was. 6. The first major use of 3D for Pixar. While 3D movies are fairly common these days, if you go back to 2009, 3D movies were not exactly a huge business. While some cheap attempts like Robert Rodriguez's Spy Kids 3D were successes at the box office, Most people hated the format because the style was gimmicky, the red and blue tinted glasses made the movies look greenish and blurry, and only recently has 3D finally found a display method that was acceptable. IMAX was the first company to really show how good 3D could look with their various 3D documentaries and major releases like The Polar Express. Slowly, theaters started installing 3D projectors for movies like Chicken Little and Monster House, the Columbia Pictures movie we discussed in great detail a few episodes ago. And 2009 was the year the format truly broke out into the mainstream. Not only did Avatar shatter what was possible with 3D, but Coraline, another fellow nominee for Best Animated Feature, was also praised for the unique use of 3D. While these two movies may have used 3D better than Up did, Up was Pixar's first major attempt at making a movie in the format, and it succeeded in some major ways, especially concerning scenes of the house floating and an aerial dogfight. Number 7. Controversial alternate nominees. Although it would be a stretch to say any of the nominees were truly controversial, there were a couple of contenders that had, shall we say, concerns from others. Coraline came under fire from parents who felt that with a PG rating, the same rating shared by Up, the movie was too violent and scary for kids, though I'd like to point out that parental guidance is exactly what the rating stands for. Secret of the Kells had a few people complaining about the mixture of fantasy elements with the subject of writing a holy book, though these complaints were pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. Disney's The Princess and the Frog was one of the biggest competitors to win. The movie actually had 3 Oscar nominations in total, with 1 for Best Animated Feature and 2 for Best Song. However, this film had, and some would argue continues to have, baggage. As the film that featured Disney's first African-American princess, the movie was an important step for the company and certainly long overdue. But when you make a movie of such importance, there is going to be conflict from audiences. Early in the film's production, the main character was named Maddie and was a maid for a white family. While being a maid to cruel employers was not exactly new to Disney movies, there were concerns from some activists that this was reinforcing racial stereotypes. Disney quickly pivoted, renaming the protagonist Tiana and making her an aspiring restaurateur. Then there was the fact that the film was directed by John Musker and Ron Clements, who directed several Disney classics like The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and previous Best Animated Feature nominee Treasure Planet. While all excellent movies, the 2 directors were white, and there were serious questions about whether or not Disney should have made a black filmmaker the director, with the issue being highlighted more by the fact that Bruce Smith, the director of the first animated feature film starring African American characters and creator of Disney's own The Proud Family, was right there working on the film as an animator for the movie's villain, and kicking serious butt while doing it. And while the music was highlighted as being a special strength of the film, as evidenced by the 2 Oscar nominations in Best Song, many pointed out that the music was written by Randy Newman, who was also not African American, and critics complained that this was another example of white Hollywood telling black stories. Outside of that, many found it strange that Disney would highlight their first African-American princess only to have her be a frog for most of the movie. Throw in the issue with the antagonist who used voodoo magic, the complaints that Tiana's friend was a white savior, supposedly, and the unfortunate timing of the movie being set in New Orleans soon after Hurricane Katrina hit. For the record, animated films take an average of 5 years to make, so this was just unfortunate timing on Disney's part. And while The Princess and the Frog is considered a classic today, it did, and still does, have its share of critics. That being said, it didn't have the biggest baggage that Up's biggest competitor had, and that was the accusations that Wes Anderson did not direct Fantastic Mr. Fox. While it's hard to determine who Up's biggest competitor was, I think most would agree that it was The Princess and the Frog, which is why it's in the title of this video. But the reality is that Fantastic Mr. Fox was likely the stealth competitor animation fans were underestimating. Not only was the movie loved by adult audiences, not only did it feature respected Hollywood talent, not only did it get a second Oscar nomination for Best Score, a score that in my opinion wasn't even that great, it was directed by Wes Anderson, a beloved auteur director in the business who was a previous Oscar nominee himself. Or was it? While there were undoubtedly members of the Academy who would have voted for Fantastic Mr. Fox as a way of voting for Wes Anderson, there were concerning reports that Wes didn't actually direct the movie. In fact, it became almost a scandal that, despite being credited as the sole director, many of the film's animators made claims that he was never on set, that he spent the majority of his time in his hotel room next door because he simply didn't want to be there. When the DVD was released, a making of feature did little to dispel these rumors, as there were multiple examples of Wes acting out scenes in his hotel room and emailing the videos to the cast and crew, and shockingly few images of him on the set. For a film whose greatest campaign asset was the director's involvement, these stories were poison to Fantastic Mr. Fox's campaign, and likely cut off any chance the film would have had in upsetting Up for the Oscar. Number 9, multiple Oscar nominations and wins. When you look at all the nominees for Best Animated Feature this year, it's amazing that 3 of the 5 movies had multiple Oscar nominations. That was a feat that had never happened up to this point, and it was a true validation for animation as an art form. Fantastic Mr. Fox had 2, The Princess and the Frog got 3, and Up received an impressive 5. Maybe not as many as Pixar's last couple of films, but still impressive by any metric. What's more, it became the first Pixar film since The Incredibles to win multiple awards. It received a nomination for Best Sound Editing, it received a nomination for Best Original Screenplay, a nomination, as you know if you've been watching this series, that has been crucial in swinging the awards towards a particular film since Shrek pulled off the first win in 2000. The movie would win the Oscar for Best Score, giving Michael Giacchino his first competitive Oscar. And, of course, the movie won Best Animated Feature. But it was that 5th Oscar nomination that truly swung the race in Up's direction, and really made this race not much of a race to begin with, despite all of the time we've spent here. Number 10, Up received a Best Picture nomination. Alright, so chances are some of you eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that when I listed off the 10 nominees for Best Picture earlier in the movie, I actually only listed 9. Let's go back to the board and remove the specially placed black box. Once we do that, you can see that Up was actually one of the nominees for Best Picture, making it the first animated movie since Beauty and the Beast to receive a nomination in the top category. Forgive me for being cagey about this fact, but if we opened the video with that information, there would have been no suspense, and there would have been no reason to speculate over why Up persevered over the other movies. And what fun would that have been with a lineup as strong as this year? However, Up did receive a Best Picture nomination. A well-deserved one, I might add. And there was no way it was losing Best Animated Feature when it was also crowned one of the 10 best films of the year by the Academy. And so another year had come to a close. This was also the last year of the 2000s, and the 2010s would begin the following year. This new decade would open with a new high for DreamWorks Animation, whose How to Train Your Dragon would soar to new critical heights for the company. However, even if DreamWorks was soaring in the sky, on the ground a group of toys were back in town. See you all next time. Hey, you made it to the end. Thank you so much for making it to the end. Just a few more things. First of all, the names that you see on the screen, these are our Patreon and YouTube member supporters. And I thank each and every one of them. Their support helps me make exclusive videos for Patreon and YouTube members, as well as keep the channel running. And of course, is just of huge kindness to me. Also, don't forget to check out the iCritic-led podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Deezer, whatever podcasting service you listen to, it is there. We definitely want to see you there. And hey, there's also other videos that you can check out. So, check out these other channels, these other videos, especially that one. I think that's a really good one.